There are moments that settle into you so quietly, you don't even realize they've taken root. And then one day, years later, they surface, not with clarity, but with a kind of weight. I've tried not to think about it, told myself it wasn't that serious. But sometimes it still creeps in, like a feeling you can't shake, a memory just out of focus. I didn't know it then, but everything shifted that day, and it started with a look I wasn't supposed to notice. It was one of those lazy Sundays where everything felt kind of soft around the edges, warm light through stained glass, the low murmur of prayers, the smell of old books and floor polish. My dad had parked us in the back again, near the double doors, because we were late. We were always late. I remember picking at a loose thread on my jacket sleeve, half listening to the readings, just waiting for it to be over. And then I saw him. He was standing against the far wall, maybe 20 feet from us. Older guy, grayish beard, thick glasses, one of those puffy winter coats people wear, even when it's not cold enough. He wasn't looking around like everyone else. He was staring at me. At first I thought maybe I was imagining it, but every time I looked up, he was still there. Same spot, same expression. That grin. It wasn't normal. It was wide, frozen, almost like he was waiting for something. Like he thought we were sharing a joke I didn't get. I kept glancing back, trying not to be obvious. He didn't blink, didn't move, just leaned against the wall like he had all the time in the world. I told myself maybe he was someone's grandparent. Maybe he was just odd, but I couldn't shake that feeling, like I was being studied. Not seen, watched. I didn't say anything to my dad. I wasn't sure what I'd even be saying. Some old guy smiled at me. It felt stupid in my head, but my chest was tight the rest of the service. The sun was warm through the windows that day, but I remember feeling cold the whole time, like something had brushed against me. I didn't understand yet. I think what unsettled me most wasn't just the man. It was realizing I wasn't the only one who noticed him. My dad's not the kind of person who overreacts. He's quiet in crowds, polite in public, but when he senses something off, you feel it in the way he moves. That morning, right in the middle of a hymn, he shifted closer to me, almost casually, like he was just stretching or adjusting. But I knew better. He moved to stand between me and that guy. Not fully, not in a way that would draw attention, but enough that I couldn't see the man anymore unless I leaned. I didn't. I just stayed still. Something about my dad's silence made the moment heavier. He wasn't whispering anything, wasn't glancing over his shoulder, just standing a little stiffer than usual, his hands clenched in front of him. For the rest of the service, I kept wondering what he saw. If it was the same thing I did, that too still posture, that smirk that felt like it was meant only for me. I hoped he'd say something on the way home, crack a joke about weirdos or make a comment about keeping distance. But he didn't. In the car, he just stared out the windshield for a few seconds before starting the engine, like something was turning over in his head. I watched him in the mirror as we drove, wondering if I should ask. I didn't, and maybe that was part of it, not just the creepy man, but the quiet afterward. The kind of silence that makes you feel like if you bring it up, it becomes real, and at that point I think both of us still wanted to believe it wasn't. It had been a few days. Enough time that the weird feeling from church had started to fade. Not gone, exactly, just tucked into the back of my mind like a bad dream. I didn't need to look at too closely. School was normal. Cold air, chatter at the lockers. That musty hallway smell. I'd started to convince myself I'd overthought the whole thing. Then, that afternoon, walking out to the pickup line, I saw him. He was standing just beyond the chain-link gate that wrapped around the front of the school, half in shadow. Same coat, same glasses. Holding one of those oversized convenience store drinks like he'd been there a while. He wasn't talking to anyone. He wasn't moving, just watching. He didn't wave, didn't smile this time. That somehow made it worse. He looked like he was waiting, but not for someone, just waiting with something. My legs froze for a second. I could hear kids yelling behind me, zippers being pulled, cars idling along the curb, but my body went quiet. I didn't feel cold, but I remember my fingers going numb. I didn't tell anyone. Not a teacher. Not my dad when he pulled up in the car. I couldn't even explain why I was scared. He hadn't done anything. That was the worst part. It all looked harmless from the outside, but I knew it was him. Same grin from church, just turned off now. No expression, no mask, and the way he stood there, still, patient, like he knew I'd see him. It made something settle in my chest that hasn't fully left since. By the time Friday rolled around, I'd mostly pushed it down. Church, that guy, even the weird moment at the school gate, all of it felt like something from a different week. That afternoon we had one of those game days for trail pioneers, scavenger hunt style. Everyone was excited, buzzing like soda cans that'd been shaken up. They split us into teams and handed out these lists filled with stuff like rope, flashlights, tiny first aid kits, all scout-themed, of course. The kind of things hidden in random corners of the building that made you feel like you were on some big adventure. For a while it was fun. The gym echoed with footsteps and yelling, and the smell of rubber floors and sweat felt oddly comforting. Some kids went off in pairs, others wandered alone. I drifted too through the cafeteria, then into the old back hallway I'd never noticed before. The further I went, the stranger the building felt, rooms that didn't look like they'd been used in years. A dusty mop leaned against a wall and old laminated posters curling at the corners. I opened a door and found a dim lounge with a vending freezer humming low in the corner, glowing slightly. Still, none of it seemed dangerous, just forgotten, quiet in the way storage spaces always are. I think part of me liked it, the freedom of being alone, the sense of exploring someplace secret. I didn't feel scared, not yet. I told myself this is what kids are supposed to do. But then I realized I hadn't heard anyone in a while. No shouting, no footsteps, no doors opening. Just the soft buzz of the freezer and my own breath in that still hallway. And for the first time that day, I didn't want to be alone anymore. I was crouched in front of the freezer, pretending to be focused on the game. I wasn't even really looking for anything on the list at that point, mostly just curious. I remember my hand brushing against the cold edge of a plastic ice pop inside and thinking, stupidly, that no one would notice if I took one. That's when I heard him. Not footsteps, just a voice, low and almost cheerful, like he was already part of the moment, like he'd been watching me long enough to join in without needing permission. My heart didn't race right away, it just stopped. He was standing a few feet away, half blocking the hallway. Same coat, same glasses, same awful grin, like he was still telling some private joke only he understood. He wasn't surprised to see me. He looked like he expected to. He moved in closer, too close, and that's when everything went cold. Not outside, inside my body. Like all the warmth drained into the floor. His hand reached out and wrapped around my wrist. Gently, almost like he was guiding me. But it wasn't gentle, it was firm, controlling. I didn't move at first. Couldn't, I didn't even think run. I just froze, locked in place like a button had been pushed, and I stopped working. Then something broke through. Not a clear thought, not even panic, just refusal. A sharp, primal no. And that's when fear finally hit. Not the kind you feel watching a movie or telling stories with a flashlight under your chin. This was the kind that hits deep in your chest, behind your ribs, and makes your whole body scream, get away now. And somehow, I did. His hand tightened when I pulled, just slightly, but enough to make it clear that he wasn't ready to let go. It wasn't rage or panic on his face, which somehow made it worse. It was calm, like I was the one overreacting, like he was still in control. His voice dropped low, soft and scolding, the kind of tone an adult uses when a kid's being difficult. That's when the fear changed. It stopped being abstract, stopped being about vibes or creepy smiles, or that strange sense of being watched. It became real, physical. My body made the decision before my mind did. I yanked back hard, and this sound came out of me, something between a yell and a cry, louder than I meant it to be. He let go, just like that. And for half a second I thought maybe I'd imagined everything, that maybe he'd just been trying to help, or joke, or whatever excuse someone like him might give. But his face, when I looked up, it shifted, not worried, not scared, just annoyed. Like I'd ruined something. I didn't wait. I ran. I didn't look behind me. Didn't think. Didn't stop to process anything. My legs moved on their own, fast and clumsy down that hallway. I think I hit the corner of a table on the way out, but I didn't feel it. My chest burned by the time I reached the gym. When I pushed open those double doors, it was like waking up underwater, disoriented, breathless, every sound suddenly too loud. Kids were still laughing. The game was still happening. Nothing had changed. Except me. I told my troop leader first, still out of breath, still not totally sure I was making sense. But he listened. He didn't laugh it off or tell me I misunderstood. He looked me in the eye, told me to stay put, and walked straight out of the gym. That moment sticks with me almost more than anything else. Not what I said, but the way he didn't question it. Like he already knew something wasn't right. My dad showed up not long after. He didn't raise his voice, didn't demand anything, but I could see it all in his jaw, in the way he gripped the steering wheel on the ride home. That silence again, like when he saw the man at church, but sharper now, like something was breaking behind it. A few days later, I overheard pieces of a conversation between him and one of the scout committee people. That man, the one who grabbed me, he wasn't some visitor. He lived there, upstairs, in one of the little rooms over the church offices. He worked maintenance or did odd jobs. I'm not sure, but he had keys, access. He'd been around for a long time. It made my skin crawl, not because he showed up again, but because I realized he never had to show up. He was always there. Someone else, another parent, mentioned he'd been reported before. A boy had said something. I never found out what. Sometimes I wonder how close I came to something worse. What would have happened if I hadn't pulled away fast enough? If he'd dragged me further into that hallway? If no one had believed me? And the part I can't shake, the part that stuck with me the longest, is knowing that for a while none of us even knew he was there at all. There are parts of that fall I barely remember. Dumb stuff, late nights, the usual. But this one night, it stuck with me in a way I didn't expect. Not because of what happened exactly, more because I still don't know what to do with it. It wasn't a nightmare, and it wasn't a ghost story. It was just one of those moments where something shifts, and you don't realize how far you've crossed until you're already on the other side. And ever since then, it's felt like a door never quite closed behind me. It started like most nights did back then, sitting in someone's garage, scrolling through our phones, trying to feel less bored than we actually were. The air had that early October bite to it, cool enough for hoodies, warm enough to linger outside. We didn't have much to do, not in a town like ours. Someone, I think it was Kyle, brought up the lodge, that broken down place out past the reservoir, the one you could barely see from the road unless you already knew it was there. I'd heard rumors, everyone had, the usual small town stuff, creepy noises, missing hikers, candles in the windows when no one was inside. But it always sounded more like dares passed between middle schoolers than anything real. We were older now, too old to scare that easily, but still too young to need a reason. So when Kyle said we should check it out, no one pushed back. It was the kind of night where even a bad idea felt better than another hour doing nothing. And maybe that was part of it. We wanted something to happen, not something dangerous, not really, just something to shake us out of the usual, something to remember. Looking back, I don't know why I didn't hesitate. I usually overthink everything. But that night, it just felt like momentum, like we were already going before I had time to weigh it. It wasn't until later, hours later, that I'd realize how fast things can tip from harmless to something else entirely, and how sometimes you say yes before you even know what question you've answered. I remember the exact moment we stepped inside, the way the air changed. It hit all at once, stale and thick, like wet drywall and smoke that never cleared. The kind of smell that makes you stop breathing through your nose. The floor creaked even under our slow steps, and our flashlights caught dust swirling in front of us, thick like fog. The place hadn't just been abandoned. It felt like it had been forgotten on purpose. Marcus pulled out 3 candles from his bag and started setting them up in a circle near the middle of what used to be the lobby. The wax was already a little melted, like he'd used them before. He said something about how it would feel more real this way, but that part didn't sit right with me. The candles felt out of place, not just weird, but like we were crossing some kind of line we didn't fully see. Once they were lit, and we turned our flashlights off. The darkness settled in fast. The kind of dark that made the room feel too big and too close at the same time. The candlelight barely reached past our knees. It flickered against the rotting walls, casting shadows that moved just enough to keep pulling my eyes to the edges. I remember thinking this was supposed to be fun. It was supposed to feel dumb and harmless, like everything else we did. But something about that space, the silence, the smell, the way the shadows stretched, it felt wrong in a way I didn't have words for yet. Like the building didn't mind us being there, but it wasn't going to pretend we didn't matter either. And for the first time that night, I wondered if we'd already stayed too long. At first, I thought Kyle was just messing around. He looked down at his phone and said it had died, but he didn't seem that bothered, just shrugged and put it back in his hoodie pocket. I still had mine, so I didn't think much of it, until I checked my battery a few minutes later. It was at 52%, then 41%, then 19%, dropping faster than I'd ever seen. I remember just staring at the screen, watching the numbers sink like it was counting down to something. Marcus said his screen froze, then it flickered and shut off completely. No warning, no glitching, just black. That's when I started to feel it, that tight pull in my chest. We'd barely even started messing with the candles, and already it felt like something was going sideways. I tried to convince myself it was the cold, or maybe the building messing with our signals. But this wasn't signal. This was power. We weren't even an hour in, and now none of us had a working phone. No clock, no light, no way to reach out. It suddenly hit me how far out we were from anything. No houses nearby, no passing cars, just trees, a decaying building, and us. The timing is what I can't shake. The way it happened, one by one, right after we shut off our flashlights, like it waited until we were relying on something else. I know how that sounds, but I remember thinking, we're not supposed to be able to call for help, and even now, it still feels like that moment wasn't random. Like something didn't want us lit up or connected, just trapped, alone, in the dark. I don't know how long we'd been sitting there before it happened. Maybe 20 minutes, maybe less. Time felt strange in that place, like it moved slower, thicker. The candles were burning low, wax puddling in weird shapes on the dusty floor. We hadn't said much. No one wanted to be the first to admit they were uneasy, but we all were. It was in the way we kept glancing around without moving our heads. Then that sound, sharp, dry, sudden, like a thick branch snapping but cleaner. It didn't come from around us. It came from above, straight up, the second floor. I remember how my whole body locked up. Not in panic, not yet, just that frozen, alert kind of stillness where your ears strain harder than your eyes. Kyle was the first to move, slowly lifting his flashlight. I followed. We aimed toward the exposed beams and shadows overhead, half expecting to see someone leaning over the railing watching. But there was nothing, just stillness. The kind of stillness that somehow feels louder than the sound that came before it. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and tight, and Marcus was gripping his phone like it might come back on if he held it hard enough. We didn't say anything. We didn't need to. I could feel it in the air between us. We all thought someone was up there, but none of us wanted to be the one to say it out loud, as if saying it would make it true. That crack, it wasn't random. It was placed, intentional, and it's the silence that followed, thick, endless, waiting, that still plays in my head when I try to sleep. Something shifted after that sound, not just in the room, but in us. Before, there had been this low, nervous energy, like we were all pretending to be braver than we were, feeding off each other's laughs. But after the crack from upstairs, the energy just drained. Nobody touched the board again. Nobody even looked at it. We sat in a weird, stiff silence, staring past the candlelight like we were trying not to see too much. I kept checking over my shoulder, not in a dramatic way, more like a reflex I couldn't stop. Every few minutes I'd glance back at the entrance, or down the hallway to our left, thinking maybe I heard something shift. I didn't, but it still felt like something was in motion, just slow enough that we wouldn't notice until it was too close. Marcus was barely breathing. Kyle had his legs pulled up, arms wrapped tight like he was trying to shrink. We weren't messing around anymore. Not with each other, not with the place. We weren't even whispering. It was like we all came to the same silent agreement without saying a word, just don't disturb anything else. It didn't feel haunted. That's the thing I keep thinking about. It wasn't some spooky movie vibe with whispers or cold spots. It was heavier, like being observed, judged, maybe, watched by something with a reason. I don't know if we wanted to leave but were too stubborn to admit it, or if we were hoping that staying still might somehow keep us safe. But I do remember the feeling, that awful, still feeling, of being surrounded by more than walls, and knowing we weren't the only ones holding our breath. It happened so fast, but I can still feel every part of it. We were sitting there in silence, not scared exactly, just waiting, unsure. The candles were burning lower, the wax starting to drip onto the floor in these messy, melting trails. I was staring at the board even though no one had touched it in a while. I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe nothing. Maybe just hoping the night would be over soon without anything else happening. Then there was this crack. Not like the one from earlier. This one was sharper, closer, and before I could even process what it meant, something smacked down onto the board. Hard. The sound of it hitting, that thud of something small but solid, snapped everything. It was a rock, a small one, maybe the size of a plum, but heavy. It didn't roll in from the side. It fell straight down like it had been dropped from above. No one moved for a second. We all stared at it like we were trying to make it not exist. I didn't even think. I just stood up, fast, knocking over my flashlight. Kyle was already moving, and Marcus wasn't far behind. We didn't say a word, just grabbed whatever we could in the blur and bolted for the exit. The sound of our shoes hitting the wood floor, the slamming door, the rush of cold night air. That's all I remember clearly. Everything else is a blur of breath and adrenaline, and something deep in my chest telling me not to look back. I didn't want to know where the rock came from, or who was close enough to drop it. All I knew was that we needed to get out before whatever came next. I couldn't bring myself to go back. Not the next morning. Not ever. Marcus and Kyle said they were just going to grab the stuff we left behind, mostly the board and the candle tins. Part of me wanted to know if it was all still there, if the room looked the same in daylight, but the rest of me, the bigger part, didn't want to see that place again, not even in the sun. When they came back, they looked off. Not scared exactly, just unsettled in a way they didn't know how to explain. Marcus said the candles were still sitting where we left them. Same pool of wax, same little ring of dust around each one. Nothing disturbed. But the board, the one thing we'd all seen with our own eyes, the one thing we were sure no one would want, was just gone. No signs of anyone else being there. No footprints, no trash, nothing. Just an empty spot where it used to be. That detail still messes with me. I've tried to come up with reasons. Maybe someone else went up there after us. Maybe a local kid saw our lights and waited for us to leave. But even then, why take that and leave the rest? Why not mess with it, trash it, scatter it around? The more I think about it, the less sense it makes, and the more I hate that I don't have an answer. Sometimes I wonder if we left something behind besides just the candles. If maybe we invited something out by being stupid, by not knowing what we were playing with. Or maybe the building just took something back. I'll never know for sure, and that's what still gets under my skin. There are parts of that summer I still think about, but one weekend, this one specific day, it keeps surfacing in ways I can't fully explain. Not loud, not obvious, just these flickers, a stretch of dirt road, the hum of cicadas cutting out all at once, the sound of gravel shifting when no one's around. At the time, it felt like nothing. Now it feels like the edge of something I never saw coming. We didn't go looking for anything that day. It was just one of those late July mornings when the heat already had a weight to it, and none of us wanted to be indoors. Marcus had just moved with his family out to this weirdly quiet town in Georgia, pine trees everywhere, wide yards with nothing in them, and that kind of silence that always feels like it's waiting for something. Leo and I drove out because, well, what else were we gonna do? We were all in that in-between space after high school, when everything feels temporary and slow, like the days aren't quite real. Behind Marcus's place, there was a narrow creek, nothing special, but it curved out into the trees and looked just interesting enough to follow. No phones, no map, just the three of us moving deeper without thinking about how far we were going. I remember at one point the sun shifted behind the canopy and suddenly everything felt darker. Not in a creepy way, not yet, but like we'd walked through an invisible curtain. I don't remember the exact moment we got lost. It wasn't dramatic or obvious, just, at some point, we weren't sure if we were circling back or going deeper. The trees all looked the same, the water sounded different. I think we all felt it, but no one wanted to be the first to say it out loud. I kept expecting to hear a dog bark, or a lawnmower, or anything that sounded like people, but there was nothing. It didn't feel dangerous yet, just still, and for the first time all summer, I felt like we were somewhere we weren't supposed to be. Then the trees opened a little, and something strange came into view. I don't remember seeing the road that led to the building, just the trees pulling back a little, and suddenly it was there, this low brick structure sunk into the ground like it had been waiting a long time to be found. Vines had grown across the roofline, and the parking area was nothing but packed dirt and weeds, like no one had bothered to clear it in years. But the strangest part wasn't the building itself, it was the sound. Soft gospel humming, slow, steady, floating out into the woods like it didn't care who heard it. That's what pulled us closer. None of us said anything. It was just a quiet agreement, like we needed to see who was inside. And I think, at least for me, I thought maybe this was a good sign. People meant roads. Roads meant phones. All of that seemed simple enough in the moment. Looking back now, I should have known better. The kind of place that's hard to see until you're right in front of it. That's not always a place you're meant to walk into. The door wasn't locked. It didn't even creak. We stepped inside, and everything just stopped. The piano, the humming, the rustle of pages, all of it frozen in an instant. The room was filled with people. Not a crowd, but enough that we should have felt some kind of warmth. But there was none. Just faces turned toward us, unmoving. Eyes that didn't narrow or widen, just looked. I didn't feel threatened exactly. I felt exposed, like whatever they were doing before we arrived had been theirs. Private, intact, and now we'd shattered it just by breathing their air. None of us said a word as we backed out of the building. The silence clung to us like humidity. The dirt path pulled us forward again, and we followed it because we didn't know what else to do. A few minutes later, Leo spotted something off to the left. A flicker of silver, maybe, and we slipped through a break in the trees. We didn't talk much after leaving that building, not right away. The dirt path kept winding along the creek, tighter now, like the woods were reclaiming the edges. At some point, Leo veered off a little and called us over, but not loud, just a low, sharp breath like he didn't want to disturb whatever he'd found. Tucked in a shallow clearing was a makeshift camp. No tent, just a green tarp draped awkwardly between two branches and a pile of charred wood that still smelled faintly like smoke, if you got close enough. The mess tin was what got me. It wasn't rusted. Inside was a dull spoon, half covered in what looked like old beans, dried and sun-baked but not yet crusted over. Next to it, a plastic jug of water, half full. I didn't want to touch anything. I didn't want to move too much, even. Something about the way it was all arranged, the neatness, the stillness, felt like whoever had been there wasn't far. Marcus muttered something about weird squatters, but his voice trailed off before it landed. It wasn't that it looked dangerous. It looked intentional, maintained. I stood there trying to do the math on how long it takes for ashes to cool, for water to gather dust. But the real question was just beneath all of that. Who was this for? Or maybe, who was this still for? I had the sudden feeling that we were standing in someone's space. Not a campsite, not a shelter, just a place someone guarded. And I couldn't shake the idea that they were watching us decide whether or not to stay. So we left it behind. We kept walking. That's all we could do. We didn't run. We didn't even walk fast, at least not at first. The dirt road stretched out in front of us. sun cutting through the tree line in sharp, hot angles, and I just remember focusing on the sound of our feet, that dry crunch of gravel under sneakers. None of us were talking, but I could feel it, the tension thick between us, like we were all waiting for someone to admit that something was wrong. Then Leo slowed down and turned around. He didn't say anything, just raised a hand and pointed back over his shoulder. They were standing there, still as stone, maybe a dozen of them, spaced out in a line in front of the building we'd just walked away from. No movement, no reaction, just watching. Not like they were curious, more like they were making sure. I couldn't tell if they were older or younger. Their faces were too far to see clearly, but even from a distance I felt it, that kind of stare that makes your chest go tight, like you're being measured. I didn't know if we were being punished for interrupting something, or if this was just what they did to people who didn't belong. I told myself maybe this was normal for them. Small town habits, weird church customs, whatever. But deep down, I knew that was a lie. We weren't just being watched, we were being remembered. I didn't look back again after that. I didn't want to see if they were still there. Part of me still wonders if they stayed long after we were gone, just standing in that same line, staring down the road, waiting for someone else to wander in. The road bent, and then we saw it. The gas station, or what was left of one. We followed the road without knowing if it led anywhere. Just kept walking, heads down, dust on our legs, the silence between us heavier than before. When we first saw the old gas station through the trees, I think we all felt a small surge of relief. It was beat up, the kind of place with a sagging roof and faded signage where the letters had peeled away years ago. But it was there, a building meant for people, somewhere that had lights and windows and maybe a phone. But the closer we got, the more wrong it felt. The windows were caked in grime. One of the pumps looked like it had been hit by a truck and never fixed. There were weeds growing out of the cracks in the pavement, and for a second I almost didn't want to go in. I kept telling myself it was fine, just old, just rural, that's all. Inside, the air smelled like motor oil and something sweet that had gone bad a long time ago. Shelves half empty, dust like it had settled into the labels. But there was a man behind the counter, like none of it was unusual. He didn't flinch when we walked in. He just looked up like he'd already been expecting us. There was something in his posture, like we were part of a routine, like lost kids stumbling through his door was just another piece of the day. I don't remember the exact words he used when he gave us directions, just how calmly he said them, how automatic it sounded, and I remember thinking, not in a scared way, just this weird, slow realization, we weren't the first ones to come through here, not even close. We followed the directions he gave us, left at the fork, past the metal fence, keep going till we hit a telephone pole with a cracked base. It was the first time all day that we moved with some kind of purpose, even if it wasn't confidence. The sun was slipping down, orange through the trees, and the road behind us felt heavier with every step we took. I didn't want to look back. I told myself it was better not to, but I did. I don't know why. Maybe I thought he'd gone back inside, or maybe I just wanted to be sure we were really done with that place. He was still there, just standing outside the station like he hadn't moved an inch. Arms crossed, same sweat-stained cap pulled low, and that grin not wide, not exaggerated, just enough to feel like a secret being kept from me. It didn't feel amused. It felt knowing, like he'd watched the same exact scene play out before. Kids coming out of those woods, faces pale and quiet, heading off in the direction he sent them. I didn't feel threatened by him exactly, but I didn't feel safe either. There was something in the way he stared, like he wasn't watching us leave, but waiting to see if we'd turn back. Even now that moment sticks, that quiet little smile, like he knew what we'd seen, maybe even who we'd seen. I didn't know what we were walking away from, but I had this sick feeling, even then, that whatever it was, he'd never had to. We hit the highway just as the sky started folding into dusk, that strange purplish gray where headlights don't help yet, but the dark's already in your lungs. We tried waving a few cars down, but no one slowed. I don't blame them. We probably looked like trouble. It was Leo who spotted the cruiser first. Its lights off, just rolling slow along the shoulder like it wasn't looking for anything in particular. The officer didn't seem surprised when we flagged him down. Didn't ask what we were doing or why we looked like we'd walked straight out of the woods. Just raised his eyebrows slightly when Marcus gave the address. I remember the sound he made, this low exhale through his teeth, like something he'd heard before. He didn't press for details. Just told us to be careful. Said not to go out that way again. But it wasn't the words, it was how he said them. Not as a suggestion, not like a friendly heads up. It felt like a rule, like something passed down, understood, unspoken. I kept waiting for him to ask more questions, maybe make a joke about lost city kids getting spooked. But none of that came. Just silence and the steady hum of the tires on the way back. It took him less than 20 minutes to drive us to Marcus's place. That same path had taken us hours to lose ourselves in. I watched the woods blur past out the window and realized I hadn't felt the ground under my feet the whole ride, like part of me hadn't left yet. The part that keeps wondering what we actually walked into, and why no one really wants to talk about it. There are places you think about long after you've left them, not because of the memories you made there, but because of the ones you didn't understand. Jasper Ridge wasn't even on the map for us, just another pin on a quiet route we took one summer. But there was something about the way it sat in my memory, like dust that never shook off. I've tried to make sense of it, tried to talk myself into thinking it was just a bad coincidence, a weird little detour. But some moments don't let you move on that easily. We weren't in any rush that summer, just driving with the windows cracked and no real plan, letting the road decide. Alina had a habit of flipping through local property listings on her phone whenever we stopped for gas, mostly for fun. But part of me knew she was serious. She wanted land. Space, a place where she could build something from scratch, maybe even start that horse barn she always talked about. And I liked the idea of quiet. I just didn't expect this kind of quiet. Jasper Ridge was the kind of place you could miss entirely if you blinked. One post office, maybe 2 streetlights, and a gas station that looked like it hadn't updated its signage since the 90s. The kind of town where people wave at you just because they don't recognize your car. At first it felt charming, simple, but as we drove deeper, past wide open fields with no fences, no animals, not even mailboxes, the quiet started to feel a little heavier. There was a point where the road curved and everything just dropped off. No houses, no birds, no movement. Alina said it felt peaceful, and I agreed out loud, but something about the stillness made the back of my neck tense, like the whole place was holding its breath. I told myself I was just being city paranoid, that I wasn't used to the way silence sounds when it has nothing to compete with. But even now, thinking back, I remember how loud the quiet felt in my ears. I should have said something. Maybe we would have turned around sooner. Or maybe not. Sometimes you don't realize something was off until you're too far in to do anything about it. We just finished looking at this weird little property down a dead-end road, overgrown fields, a rusted-out trailer, the kind of place you tell yourself could be something if you had the money, the time, the vision. Alina was still talking about it when we passed the church. It just appeared, tucked behind a row of pines, small and white, with peeling trim and a crooked sign that said Shepherd's Grace Fellowship. That alone didn't feel unusual. What did was the parking lot. It was full, not just a few cars. Full, and not new cars either. Dust-caked sedans, a couple beat-up trucks, one maroon minivan with a missing hubcap. There was no sound coming from the building, no singing, no muffled voices, no kids running around outside. Just rows of silent vehicles in the middle of a weekday afternoon. I don't know why, but I slowed down without thinking. Alina perked up like she'd found a hidden gem. She said maybe it was a weekday service. Maybe this was how the community came together out here. She smiled in that way she does when something clicks for her, like it felt meant to be, and I wanted to believe that. I really did. So I pulled in, even though something about the way those cars sat there, all faded paint and shut windows, made me grip the wheel a little tighter than usual. The gravel crunched under the tires like it was too loud. I parked next to the minivan. The windshield had this spiderweb crack running through the glass, like it had taken a hit no one ever fixed. That was the first time I felt it, that sharp little voice in my gut. I didn't say anything. I just followed her toward the door. We sat near the back, mostly because it felt safer, easier to slip out if something felt wrong. The air inside the church was stuffy, like it hadn't been aired out in a long time. It didn't smell musty exactly. Just still, no candles, no music, no chatter. Just the soft creak of the wooden pews when we sat down and the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. I reached for the book out of habit, one of those thick, navy blue ones tucked into the slot behind the seat in front of us. I thought maybe flipping through it would calm me down, give me something familiar to focus on. But when I opened it, the pages were all wrong. A chunk of them was just gone, torn clean out, not carefully removed, but ripped like someone had done it quickly, angrily. The edges were jagged, uneven. Some were missing whole chapters. The pages that were still there, they'd been written on, underlined in pen, scribbled in the margins with little arrows pointing to random phrases. Not notes, not prayers, more like corrections. I remember one verse was circled 3 times in red, with a single word written underneath it in all caps, OB. Something about that made my hands cold. I glanced at Alina, but she hadn't noticed. She was staring straight ahead, maybe trying to understand what this place was. I didn't want to disturb her, so I quietly closed the book, put it back exactly the way I found it, tried to act like it hadn't made my stomach twist. But from that point on, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't supposed to be there. Not just as outsiders, but as people who didn't believe what they did. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Just nerves. Maybe the kind of tension you get when you step into a room full of strangers and you're the only one who doesn't know how things work. But the longer we sat there, the more I realized it wasn't just that we were new, it was that we didn't belong. It started slowly. A man near the front turned his head, eyes narrowing. Then a woman 2 rows over, then someone else. Not all at once, but in this wave, like they were catching on to something invisible we were carrying, and they didn't turn away. They just kept watching. Not curious, not confused, wary. I felt it deep in my chest, that tight, hot feeling you get when you know you've walked into something you can't read. I shifted in my seat, tried to meet a few of their stares with that polite, unsure smile people use when they're trying not to overstep. But no one smiled back. Not one. What unsettled me the most, though, was how none of them were really looking at me. Their focus was all on Alina. The weight of it landed on her like a spotlight, and she felt it too. I could see it in the way her back stiffened, her hands folding a little too neatly in her lap. She didn't say anything, but she didn't have to. The silence was already saying enough. I kept thinking, did we walk in on something we weren't supposed to see? But that didn't explain it. This wasn't about privacy. It felt older than that. More personal, like we had broken some unspoken rule we didn't even know existed. I hadn't noticed him at first, probably because everything else already had my attention. The silence, the stares, the way the room felt like it was closing in without ever moving. But then he stepped forward from near the front, and the room shifted. People sat straighter. Still no one spoke, but their focus sharpened, like something had been waiting for him. He stood in front of what should have been an altar, though it barely looked like one. Just a wooden table. No crucifix, no symbols, nothing you'd find in any church I'd ever been in. He was tall, dressed in plain clothes, faded blue coveralls, scuffed at the knees, and on his face, a fabric mask, the kind that looked handmade, like it belonged in a workshop, not a place of worship. There were no markings on it, no eye holes, just fabric, tight and wrong. He lifted his hand and pointed directly at us. Not with surprise, not with confusion, just this slow, final motion, like he was selecting us from a list he'd already memorized. The room didn't move, but I felt it close. It was the kind of moment where your body tenses before your brain catches up, where every instinct you've ever learned about danger turns on at once. I almost stood up, thought about trying to explain that we were just passing through, that we didn't mean to interrupt anything, but I stopped before the words came. I could see it in the way he held his arms steady, in the way no one else blinked or flinched. They didn't want a reason. They wanted us gone. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about us being out of place. This was something more deliberate, something we'd just walked into without knowing, and now weren't meant to witness. We didn't speak when we left. There wasn't anything to say, not yet. I held the door open. Alina stepped out fast, and we made it to the car like we were just cold, or late, or tired. That's how we moved, normal, but my hands were shaking when I put the keys in the ignition. I didn't want her to notice. The gravel popped under the tires as we backed out. I avoided the rear view at first, half afraid of what I'd see, but we rolled past the front of the church, and I didn't look back until we hit the main road. That's when I saw it. A gray sedan pulling out of the lot, slow, deliberate, slipping onto the road 2 turns behind us. I told myself it was nothing, a coincidence, maybe someone else heading home after a prayer service or whatever that was supposed to be. But it didn't pass us, didn't pull off. It just stayed there, always visible in the mirror, never gaining, never falling back, not close enough to confront, just close enough that we couldn't forget. Every time I took a left, so did they. Every time I switched lanes, so did they. And with each mile, that quiet panic in my chest grew heavier. I didn't tell Alina. I couldn't. She was already gripping the passenger door handle, her eyes locked on the road ahead like she was bracing for something. Maybe she already knew. I just focused on the GPS, found the nearest sheriff's station and aimed straight for it. I didn't know what I was going to say when we got there. I just needed to get somewhere public, somewhere official, somewhere real. And even then, part of me wasn't sure it would be enough. We didn't talk about it on the drive back, not really. A few half-formed thoughts maybe, but mostly just silence and the sound of the road under the tires. We were supposed to check out one more property that afternoon, something with a pond and a half-built barn that Alina had bookmarked weeks ago. But we didn't even glance at the listing. I just drove us past the turn and she didn't ask why. The town thinned out behind us like it was retreating. Trees got taller, the sky stretched wider, and for a few minutes it almost felt normal again. But it wasn't. Something about Jasper Ridge stuck in my bones, like a bruise you can't see but still feel. Even after we crossed into the next county, I kept checking the mirror, not for the car that was gone, but for some feeling I couldn't quite name, like we'd taken something with us that hadn't wanted to leave. We packed up that night, cut the trip short, told ourselves we'd circle back to that part of the state another time, but we both knew we wouldn't. That wasn't a detour. It was a warning, a place that hadn't asked for us and never would. I still think about it sometimes. The silence in that room, the pages torn from the Bible, the way their eyes didn't blink. But I don't need answers, not anymore. Some places don't explain themselves. They just make sure you don't come back, and we haven't.